Okay, hello everyone. I'm Brian Hoagley. I'm with Side Channel. Welcome back in our series, Back to Basics. I am very excited today to have another great panel, and we'll be introducing them in a second. This is brought to you by our good friends over at Wiser. Thank you first and foremost all to them. Thanks, Gabby, for getting this going. Looking forward to the discussion. Today we have a great group. We might even have one more joining. I'd like to introduce Steve Moore, Rob Burton, and Mike Waters, and we will be discussing incident response planning, incident response, all the things that go boom in the night, if you're left and right of boom, and all the other fun stuff. So joined with me from currently across the globe, I can say that, I am bringing this to you from my very dark and soundproof basement. That's not weird. And hopefully you are all settled in for a great discussion. This will be recorded and available after the webinar concludes today, and for your viewing pleasure, and actually probably transcribed as well. So, all right, so let's get to it. Let's go round of introductions. Steve, let's start with you. Welcome to the webinar, and let's kick off. So, Steve Moore.
Thanks, Brian. I'm Steve Moore, Chief Security Strategist at Exabeam. We work in the SIM and UEBA XDR space. Prior to that, I've spent my entire career in banking, lending, financial services, managing problems like this. So typically either building analytic capabilities, being an intrusion analyst, all the way up to executive. So happy to be a part of this. And actually, I asked to be a part of it. Brian didn't have to ask me. We go back, and respect what you're doing here, Brian. Thank you.
No, thanks so much for being on. Mike Waters, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Mike Waters, I'm a principal consultant at Side Channel. I've been doing information security for a couple decades. Biggest chunk of my career building out the information security capability at a major defense contractor, where I learned a ton of lessons about things that go boom in the night. So happy to share my experiences.
Excellent, excellent. And Rob, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, Rob Burton with PreparedX. My background is from the military, from the UK, but I'm located in my temporary office in my attic currently in Newport, Rhode Island. Have a military background, as I mentioned, SF for a small period of time towards the end of my career. And ever since then, which is now 20 years, I've been helping businesses prepare for a variety of different things that go bang in the night, including cyber. And we do that. Core service is simulation exercises, planning, IR, crisis management, business continuity, and all of the above. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. No, thank you so much for being on. And I am just checking, we are at 64 attendees. Anybody watching, if you got some questions in the app, there is the ability to drop questions in there. I will be reading some of those as we're moving through the conversation. So please feel free to put a question out. I will ask the panel. We'll tackle it as best as we can, and we'll move on. I know no one can answer me except for the panelists, but is everybody ready? Okay.
Yeah.
So here we go. As many of you know, I like to draw. I'm not very good at it, but I do like to draw, and I have the ability to. So we look at incident response usually on something along a timeline, right? We've got an activity before, we've got an activity during, and we've got an activity after. So we're really going to talk about incident response planning and response in really these three chapters. And to just make an illustration very easy, we will have a line, and to follow that line, we will put, this is my bad and my terrible boom, that goes right here in the middle of our timeline. So Mike, let's start with you. We're thinking all the way left of boom, okay? Well before, and we're trying to think about anticipating and preparing for something going wrong. In your experience working with organizations now, a lot of mid-market, small businesses, what are maybe one or two simple things that a business owner is going to be able to do today to anticipate preparation for dealing with an incident later on?
I think one of the key parts of planning is to recognize that something bad will happen. So you need to have discussions about how you're going to react, who's responsible, and not to go off into business continuity, but figure out what you're going to do while you're handling the situation. So everybody has incidents. I mean, I work for a company that had millions of dollars of information security investment every year. And we had incidents all the time. And I worked with peer companies who were 10 times my size, and they had incidents all the time. So everybody has bad things happen. It's just a matter of whether or not you're prepared to deal with them. So you should have a fire extinguisher near your kitchen, because sometimes something bursts into flames. You need to have that fire extinguisher handy. So planning for the events, and there's so many just generic events. You don't need to plan for specific events. Like, you plan for staff being out because a lot of people got sick. You don't have to plan for particular illness. Or pick your most critical business system and think, what happens if that critical business system is unavailable for any reason? It doesn't have to be hackers got hold of it. It could be you had a flood in the basement and that's where your server was and it got soaked. So think about what bad thing could happen. Not necessarily why it happens, but a system becomes unavailable. That's the bad thing. Now, what would you do if that system was unavailable? So that's sort of thinking about not necessarily the cause, but the effect. Systems unavailable, key staff are unavailable. Maybe they all pooled their money for lottery tickets and sure, they all won. So now 10 of your staff are gone. You have to plan for
I always
the
like
impact.
that better than you get hit by
Yeah.
the bus scenario, right? It's just like
Win
everyone
a
won the
lottery.
lottery, we're leaving.
Yeah.
That's makes me feel better. Yeah.
Yeah. So
All right.
systems unavailable, staff unavailable, or facilities unavailable. Nowadays, that's less of a concern because we've all learned to work remotely.
All right. So sounds like the first point really being, look, acknowledge bad things will happen. Don't put your head in the sand, right? And maybe as you're starting to think about planning, generalize for what is going to happen. Don't get too caught up in particulars and planning for a very specific thing. Just start building the muscle memory around bad things could happen. I'm going to have to deal with them. What do I go do, right? Rob, what are your thoughts? What can you build on from that?
Yeah, I love definitions. I think defining between an incident and a crisis is really important, no matter how big or small your organization is. So like Mike said, incidents are happening every day, right? I was in a hotel over the weekend. The fire department showed up, the alarms are going off. There's 8 of us that evacuated the hotel. Nobody else did, and there's like 50 cars in the parking lot. So these things happen. They didn't have good drills at the hotel. That's a whole another story. But it's just a classic example of these things will happen. The fire alarm will go off. So define what an incident means to you and your business, and also define the next step up, which is when it becomes a real crisis, when you have to really get other stakeholders involved. Other things happen when you activate other elements of your plan, and that kind of leads into that planning piece, Brian, which I think incident action plan is a common term that's used, an IAP. So when you start asking yourself these questions in the early stages of developing out a plan, you can start to formulate what you would do and start to document that. I think that's important, piece of the planning piece.
Yep. So it's great to plan. It's great to keep talking about these things, but at some point it's good to write it down so you can kind of work on it, iterate, build on those things. Steve, what are your thoughts about taking, you're in this space, you're in this pre-breach, era. You're thinking about something that you're planning for it. You're thinking about planning. What are you doing about building that plan? What are you doing about getting that team, thinking about generalizing these incidents?
Yeah, I think the thing where I see most organizations of all sizes fail is they lack enough people that make the rest of the company feel comfortable in managing the crisis or the incident. Let me say it a different way. There's always incident managers, there's people of authority, there's different hats that are worn within the documentation that we're sort of flirting with at this point and spelling out. But any crisis or incident of any size is going to take a toll on the organization's ability to operate and respond. It's not one person. You may be down to the second tier, third tier, fourth tier individuals breaking off into different swim lanes to fix problems, to work with law enforcement, to work with legal, to work with executive comms. And what happens very quickly is confidence erodes rapidly, depending on situation. So comfort and confidence, who can you put in front of the owners of the company, in front of pick your 100 largest customers. who delivers that message and doesn't sound foolish delivering it? Maybe they're an executive, but they know very little about whatever this crisis is. Maybe they know a lot about the crisis, but they don't speak with an executive presence. So that, I think, is where I would want to know, say, what is I'm less interested in knowing who the point person is. In fact, if I'm giving advice, I say, okay, for purposes of planning, that person's no longer available. In fact, their backup's no longer available, and their backup's no longer available. I'll know very quickly the fortitude of your organization based on that alone. So understand who has that. And in that comfort and confidence kind of theme, now we're getting into authority. So who has the ability to shut things off, turn things on, order supplies? So that's where my brain automatically goes toward when I'm reading an IR plan or a crisis plan. And the next is, and I'll stop after this, is that too many times I see these plans are built and created in a vacuum of experience. Meaning they were built by well-meaning individuals. They were built for purposes of obtaining insurance or appeasing an auditor, but they're not worth a damn.
Right.
And they're not used. The other thing is muscle memory, right? Sort of the Krav Maga element, or maybe Aikido or whatever your thing is. How often, if when you do have an exercise or a real incident, is that plan actually used? In many cases, from what I see, it's not. Things just sort of organically happen, and that means the time you spent, creating it is worthless. So those are some things I would focus on immediately, and I've avoided cyber, breach type discussion on purpose. I'm sure we'll get to that later, but I'm talking about just the organization's ability to move. Last point is, don't make introductions in a crisis. So if you have those folks that need to act, don't introduce them to the authorities or law enforcement or even the owners of the company don't make that be the introduction. Bring your third in charge into the meetings and part of the discussions before that, or you're really harming yourself. So I'll stop there if there's any other additional questions or points of clarification.
No, I love it. Mike, what'd you have there?
I think that's especially successful when you have an organization that's got those levels where you can have a second, third, fourth tier person. You definitely want to make sure that they are known to the executives and to the external parties. And part of that is then testing the plan, going through the plan, doing tabletop exercises, just practices to make sure that everybody knows what to do. And I love and have done the exercise where, okay, everybody's ready for the exercise. Okay, you three people, go get some coffee because you're not here. Now, the rest of you figure out what you're going to do. And that sort of exercise actually helps those second, third tier persons develop the practice and expertise and muscle memory. Or it may also identify that you don't have that second tier person.
Right.
And that's often the case where that's why you need to identify that, we need to engage an external third party to be on retainer. And we need to do it now, not when something has gone bang. So, and for organizations that don't have a great bench of people who are available, there are a lot of great third-party resources where you can have an incident response team on standby and go through tabletop exercises, including them, so everybody knows everybody before something bad happens. It's an excellent point.
Yeah, I wanna come back to planning, but you raise a really great area, and I know Rob's entire organization and focus is on this area. Let's get into, Rob, when you are seeing organizations jump into testing the plans? We've got a plan built, it's written. Okay, we feel good. We've assembled the team. It's the 5-person team. It's a 50-person team. We're going to spend a couple days or a day with you in your organization. What are you seeing at that tabletop time where you're like, we're working on stuff, where you're rolling them through the scenario? What are you seeing that's like, these guys get it? They get it. Yeah. These are the right characteristics. These are the right things that they're doing. If they were in the bet, I know that they would do well because I'm seeing these things. What are you seeing during those scenarios that you're leading your clients through?
Yeah, I think leadership. I think you've got good leaders, strong leaders that have experienced this. And again, whether it's cyber or some other kind of event, they've actually managed a team through a difficult situation or multiple difficult situations. So leadership is certainly a big one. Those teams that have actually conducted training on the plan. So back to Steve's point in terms of, do we know and understand the plan? Often plans are built, by people who don't actually activate the plans. So, often, you want to make sure that those plans are activated by the team that is actually going to be utilizing the plan. Those teams that practice on a regular basis, just activating the team. I can tell you, even with some big organizations that we work with, there's still a struggle to understand what that process looks like. So for an organization that goes through that process, either on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis to start off with, where you're just practicing, those muscle memory pieces that was touched on before, how are we going to bring the team together? How are we going to coordinate, and how are we going to communicate? And what's the official word that we use? That something bad is happening right now, because as we mentioned early on, I think Mike touched on, fires happen, things go south, on a day-to-day basis. But this is a serious event now. We're coming together, and this is going to turn into a crisis pretty quickly if we don't get a handle on it. So what we like to see early on in those tabletop exercises is the ability to activate that team in a streamlined fashion where they can come together and start the process of managing the event. One other point I'll touch on during exercises is decision making. So who are the decision makers? How are they making decisions? And what we like to do in some of our exercises is, before we even get started with putting a scenario together, what we like to do is create a set of exercise objectives. So what do you want to accomplish in those? And again, whether you're a small business, medium-sized organization, when you start to do your exercise planning, the very first step is, what are the goals of today? What are the goals of the exercise that we're planning for, Q3? Define what you want to accomplish early on. And one of those typically is, the ability to make sound decisions. And I can tell you, when the heat is on, and this is in a simulated environment, right? And we used to do this in the military all the time. We're doing exercises all the time. But I can tell you, when you go into battle, it's a different thing. It's a completely different kettle of fish. So yeah, so I would say decision making. If they make the decisions, Brian, that's often good, good leadership, and that tells me that they practice on a regular basis, activating the team. And again, some of those other core roles and responsibilities that they should be practicing. If it's a new team coming together, or even a well-versed team coming together and making sure that they're continuing to build on the planning capabilities.
Yeah, so a lot of focus on leadership, a lot of focus on preparation during what it makes sense, the preparation phase, right? Training and testing on what you had built your plan on. And I heard informing or updating, right? You're testing, you're figuring out what works, you're figuring out decision makers, you're figuring out, Mike said, who, you sent 3 people for coffee. Now you're realizing, oh, this thing doesn't work if 2 of those people who just left aren't part of the process. That's a huge eye opener for organizations. So informing and updating your planning, right? You can't just, I think Steve, you hit it first. You build the plan and then it's on the shelf, and then you don't crack it open again until you really need it. We can't operate like that. Okay. It's not like riding a bike. Okay. You can't just jump back on one day and be like, oh, we know how to just totally do IR. Let's start kind of thinking about some things. Actually, first, great feedback, Ben. Yes, I know my handwriting is terrible. We're going to work on that. That's and hopefully we'll snapshot this so that you can actually read it. But no, thanks for joining. Audrey actually asks something here before we get out of this section. So she works for a consulting firm, does a lot of work with large, mid-sized companies, mainly in fintech. For smaller companies, she sees that the SANS Incident Response Handbook is far too complex for their size, for smaller organizations. I would agree. NIST's Incident Response Management Plan is great. I'm a big NIST fan. Recently wrote a book on it. If you want to go check it out on Amazon, there's my plug for the day. But yeah, it's complex, right? I get it. Her question is, what kind of guidance maybe would you take from, these really kind of stalwart known controls, frameworks, guides, and just maybe distill that could be useful for a small business. What's maybe one, two things from kind of larger enterprise experience around, here's what you really need to see in your policy. Steve, can I go to you or Rob?
So you're saying so after a policy has been created, but it hasn't been sort of pressure tested, what's another thing that's, without sort of having to read a 500-page textbook, what should they make sure to include? Is that a summation?
I guess her question is her real question is, I need a bit of guidance on how best to simplify the policy built from the SANS handbook. And I could see the SANS handbook or as kind of meaning any other standard that's out there that's probably too robust for a small business to just pick up, read, and say, okay, I can go do this.
I see all size companies mess this up as well. Words matter, definitions matter. The terms that are thrown around, event, ticket, case, incident, breach, that has to be common language throughout, and people have to understand what that means when they hear those words. And that, I think, is a great place to start, to make sure that you can have a number of incidents, if asking me, that you investigate, and then you have a whole number of ways that those could be remedied, closed, modified. If you look up what's called a Sankey chart, where you have a type of incident on the left-hand side and you have element of resolution on the other, some of it is a false positive, some of it gets escalated, some of it gets right. So what are your words? Define those and use those like your religion, I think is the first piece. And then know the inputs into that. You have a policy, but there's living documents that live before and after this sort of incident response plan or playbook. Some are analytic and investigative that merge into it. Others are further elements of response that are more business response. So know those connective elements and meet regularly. I think that's the other thing. At minimum, there needs to be, it could be weekly depending on your organization. You have comms, physical security, all these, or it could be monthly to say, hey, does this still make sense? I'm a big fan of wikis as well. So it doesn't have to be ironclad. It could be a living document. I think for mid-size organizations, that's especially where junior people or fresh eyes can make a suggestion to a certain element, and it lives and grows, and it's not this sort of made once a year kind of stamped thing. It helps it keep more up to date. I know that's where I would begin.
The definitions piece is huge. I did this at my last Fortune 500. Like, when you say event, that means this. When you say the B word, that triggers me and the general counsel. So let's reserve saying breach, right? Like, what does breach mean? What does incident mean? What does event mean? Richard, and I'm going to butcher his last name, Betchdick, he's the one who wrote the Tao of network security. Did I say his last name right?
No, Blaitlick.
Great book, right? He cites a lot of Security Onion, network security monitoring in that book, and he's got a really clear, event, incident, breach, crisis definitions, and like that adoption is phenomenal. No, I love the definitions piece. That's huge. And just real quick, Moises, I'm sorry if I butchered your name, Mr. or Mrs. Barrera. No, I am not writing backwards. There's an entire YouTube on how I do this, and I'll gladly share that later. Mike, let's go to you. You had some feedback on Stephen's points.
So incident response plan. I mean, if you're following NIST or SANS or anybody, you're not trying to get a plan that weighs a lot. So I had a client that had more pages in their incident response plan than they had employees, and it was useless to them. So we came up with a new and improved incident response plan that was like 5 pages. So it's high level.
That client.
High enough level, but one of the main parts of an incident response plan has to be determining the impact of the event. So let's say you got a phishing email. Okay, that's something you got to investigate. All right, somebody click on it. Yes. Did it lock up the entire financial system or just one laptop? That helps you determine the scale of the incident and who needs to be alerted and what needs to take place. So one of the key parts of your incident response plan is categorizing the impact of the event, because the higher the impact, the more people need to be involved in the response. If it's a low impact thing, then maybe your help desk or your outsourced IT folks can just deal with it and you get on with it. If it's
Right.
something that's affecting your clients, then you're got a lot of other people involved. If it's something you're going to need to report to regulators, you need other people involved. So a core part of your incident response plan is who gets involved depending on the level of the event. And it's really, you could do an incident response plan in 5 pages and cover all the important bases. And it should be, as Rob and Stephen have both indicated, something that people actually use.
Mm-hmm.
It's not weighed in pounds. It should be, how many times has this page been creased because people have been looking through this thing? It should definitely be actionable.
We and I guess my second plug. So when we work with clients, we actually fly in an incident response plan that we know works. We've seen it work at multiple different clients. Again, we're targeting mostly mid-market companies. So we build one that's actionable, that's pressure tested across a variety of different clients, because it's important to know that this works. And usually when you start working with clients or start working with organizations that are starting to talk about this, that means they usually don't have anything. So getting them kind of jump-started is a huge win, right? Because you don't want to spend a lot of time trying to build policies. You want to start getting to accept the policy. Let's build the last 10% that's unique to you, and let's start testing on it and training on it. Rob, you look like you had an idea on this.
Yeah, I did. And certainly as it comes to the tabletop exercise piece, when we looked at this many, many years ago, when we rebranded to become Preparedness Through Exercises, that's why we rebranded and went down this path. And again, 90% of what we do is all around exercises. We looked at the different standards around the world. HCEP has one. So, the US government has one, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and that's known as the Homeland Security Exercise Evaluation Program, and it's a long, drawn-out process, obviously for large-scale exercises, for literally for state-sized exercises. But anyway, it was a thorough process, and we looked at that and we said, how do we bring that in and tighten that up to help our corporate clients understand how to run, really strong exercises, pulling out the key elements to, strong processes like HCEP, as well as others that we combine together. And we put a 5-step process together, which I'd be happy to share with everyone. I talk about it on podcasts. We've done lots of webinars about it, as well as training around it as well, which only plug I'll give today is we're doing that training course next month. And I'd be happy to share that information if anyone wants information on that mid-March. So I'll be talking about how to run effective exercises. But so we have a 5-step process. And again, it takes those individuals through who are responsible for designing scenarios through a thorough process, everything from putting those actionable deliverables together in terms of the exercise objectives, all the way through those AARs, as they're known, the after action reports at the end of the exercise. And that's when we want to make edits to our plans, our processes, our procedures, and our capabilities. So and again, there's a number of other steps obviously in between there as you're designing the exercise. And again, we took what was probably a 20-step process from the government down to a 5-step process, and it's worked effectively over the last 8 or 9 years since we put it together.
Yeah, this is like I love this topic so much I can't talk about it. The reason that I reached out and asked Rob because in a past life when I was with an F500, I actually saw his team in action, and working with people who truly understand how to run exercises, having people who have done it before. Look, I'm not saying, and no one's saying you can't do and run your own. You should start there, start doing something, start practicing doing it on your own. But working with people who can really pressure test. And honestly, I'll tell you this, the best thing I took out of this, and Rob probably doesn't know this, is because as I was a CISO, right, I got to be part of it. I wasn't running the tabletop for my organization, which also meant Rob was the bad guy. So everyone looked at him and his organization as they were facilitating this, and they weren't taking it out on me, because usually when you're kind of, even if you're training, right, you have a negative reaction to the person that is making you go through that training, no matter how much you don't think that, you will have that. So having an independent third party, right, be able to bring you through that was immensely important to both me, because I had a very expensive meeting going on with 30 executives for a number of hours, right, stepped away, and for them to look at and go at the end of it, that was really difficult, but I'm really glad we did it. and to not have any type of ill will towards me, because I had to work with them the day after to start building out and making more robust the actual plan that we just learned wasn't good enough from Rob's exercise. All right, so anyway, let's go to, let's see here, we had some questions. Should we access the response? Who should have access to a response plan document? Is it wise to have printed copy in the office in an event of a crisis? Let's answer that, and then let's go into being prepared and unprepared for when boom happens. I will start with, I did an event, a scenario for a larger client of side channels, and I remember at the end of it, the board member going, I'm keeping a copy of this now in my car, at my office, and at home, because I now see the real value of having and knowing and understanding this. I was like, my work here is done. Anybody else have an opinion on who has access to the actual plan? Where should it be stored?
Yeah, everybody who participates or is expected to participate should have a hard copy, because so many plans assume like, well, you just download it from SharePoint at the time of the event. Like, maybe you can't get to SharePoint.
Right.
You should have a hard copy, and
hard
it should be.
Big deal. Yep.
You should have it wherever you might be. So if you work from home all the time, you should have it at home, printed out before the event. Now, there are some great tools for disseminating documents in the case of an emergency, and they work on mobile platforms, mobile phones, stuff like that. And those are really cool, but you should have a hard copy too.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And we've seen organizations during exercises not have their plans out, in the room with them, and then all of a sudden, how do we reference? How do we access it? Who accesses it? So that's another point that needs to be made early on. That those that are responsible for any role on the team should have obviously access to the plan. But I think going one step back again, it's the training of those individuals on those roles, and so they become second nature. So the plan is almost like you turn to the plan and say, have we done those 8 things we should have done at this stage of the event, emergency, incident, whatever it may be defined as. So really, we like to have a cheat sheet as well. One page, get you running type document that's on all of their desks. It's on their apps, on their phones. It's accessible wherever it's accessible, and that gets them through that first 30 minutes or hour, whatever it may be. What are those priorities right now? We need to make sure that we've communicated with these 6 stakeholders. We need to make sure that we've called 911 because there is a fire, whatever it might be. So that one-page document with those immediate actions, procedures, activation of the team, prioritized to make it real simple. Make it as simple as possible, especially if you're talking, an executive group who, again, may not do this on a regular basis and maybe practicing once a year to check the box, or a more advanced team who's doing it on a regular basis. It's still a good document to turn to get them through that first 30 minutes. We like to have a crisis coordinator on that team as well, somebody who's managing the team. So even for a small team, you've got somebody who's managing the team. They know which 1-800 number to be on. They know to use Zoom versus Teams for coordinating the response meetings, planning meetings. So the coordinator is a key role that we're seeing now in the marketplace, becoming much more for a much more advanced role within the crisis team, incident team, whatever teams you may have as it relates to preparedness. And that individual really is the organizer of those, whether it's an executive team or an operational team, a communication team, whatever it might be. And again, even for smaller organizations, mid-sized organizations, you want somebody who understands the whole process, who's there to help manage. So, and that's what we're seeing becoming more commonplace now.
Yeah, Herb adds here, he did his cybersecurity training and was taught, do not leave an electronic copy of your IRP on your network in case you're breached. Now the hackers can find it and read what you're planning to do. Yeah, I would agree. You got to figure out how to better store it. But yeah, interesting idea. Let's go into boom. Okay, Steve, I'm gonna lead with you because I love your insight. Your background. Steve and I have talked. Steve talked much more than this. He happily brought me onto a podcast where we first met and kind of just chatted about the life of living in this world and how to just work through it. what it does to you. So highly recommend going back. I'll link that down below for our discussion there. But Steve, we're in we're in the thick of it, and you choose. I'll let you choose. You want to talk about having a prepared or an unprepared team when boom happens. You're in the thick of incident response. What are your first steps? What are your first thoughts? What are you first going to?
I believe no matter the size of the company or the level of preparation, I think you're going to work in a mix of a little of both. So you're going to have people in some that are prepared and willing to engage, and others that even if they have had training and sat in the room, they're going to feign ignorance or maybe even be a detriment to solving problems. You're going to have to deal with you'll know the integrity of a lot of the leaders of your organization, frankly, when you apply pressure to them. So Rob talked about being a part of SF. My father was SF and would talk about behaviors of individuals under high stress. And you'll see that. I think there's no greater indicator the caliber of leadership you have than a crisis. I think it's one of the single greatest opportunities, especially for a junior or mid-level person, to witness, get it over with early. Once something happens, and if it's big enough, and most of my work in terms of response is dealing with Eastern Europeans and China and purposes of espionage and or maybe financial crimes, things like that. Less so of the burning the buildings on fire or we've got a hot landing zone or anything like that. Like none of that was other people that have done that well. But once the event happens, you have to make sure that you have rings of awareness, and that's another way of saying escalation. But it's more than just escalation. It's how do you keep regular cadence with those that need to know at a certain point in time. You can communicate too well. You can be clumsy in your communication. You don't want any of that. You don't want to, if there's something you're not sure of yet, if you're dealing with a cyber incident, especially if it's something that's detrimental, maybe it's ransomware, you may not want everyone to know quite yet the depth that you're into because you don't want someone to tweet that there's sort of this unfinished work happening. You want to control that message, no matter how big you are, right? You want to have your message out. How do I notify the right people at the right time? You will be under scrutiny as the linchpin in that. Why didn't I know this earlier, even with training? Well, it's because you didn't need to know quite yet. Or on the flip side, so that's where I see a lot of people mess this up, these sort of rings of knowledge. And one other tip I'll give, a point and then a tip, and then I'll hand it over. You mentioned earlier about not keeping your incident response plans and materials in a digital copy on your network. I have mixed feelings on this, but I do know recently there's several adversary groups, particularly ransomware now, they're looking for not only your IR plan, but also your cyber insurance policies. Specifically, I can talk more about this offline or one-on-one, looking for this as they exfiltrate information, but before they encrypt everything. And so that is they will spend a lot of time in your environment. This is ransomware, this is criminal. This used to be just espionage stuff. And so there is some validity to this. I still think digital copies are important, especially because I'm a big fan of the wiki type living document for the right people. So I want to make that kind of point on that one, I guess, to reinforce the earlier question or comment. I could spend all day on this, but I'll leave it to the other panel members to kind of round out what I just introduced.
No, all good, man. That's feel free to reach out. We're going to post everybody's information, contact information. Most everybody here is on LinkedIn or social. So, the ability to outreach to anyone here, talk about this, engage with them, that will definitely be made available. Mike, let's go to you. You're in the thick of it, right? You've got a well-built plan. You've done some testing, Steve hit some great points, like prepare for being unprepared, prepare for stress, right? These, and you're never going to know what people are like until you're in the thick of it. What tips do you have beyond just, well, follow your plan, follow the training, trust the training? Like, what else are you really trying to see and instill in the team as you're leading people through IR?
So one of the important lessons I learned the hard way is that you have to ensure that the person who is responsible for managing the incident is well understood that who is responsible, because if there's a vacuum of leadership, people will run off in all different directions. Early in my career, I had an incident where my role in the organization was not well understood, put it delicately, and people who had nothing to do with my organization were seizing laptops. Like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And people who were not authorized to do so were contacting the clients to tell them what was going on, and they didn't know what was going on. So you have to establish chain of command. The rings of awareness is, I love that phrasing, because you need to inform certain people at certain times. And depending on the size of your organization and structure, you have to have regular updates so that certain people will be informed. And you have to make sure that they understand that they're being informed. And if you're asking them to make a decision, you need to make clear that you're asking them to make a decision, not just leave it out there and they'll start making decisions on their own. So it needs to be clear what you're telling somebody, how much confidence you have in the information you have currently, and what actions you want from them, if any. And if you don't want them to do anything right now, or if you want them to take some suppressive action, like make sure you remind staff they are not to publicly post information on Twitter about what's going on, because we don't know what's going on yet.
Right.
And remember that communications with the press are supposed to be handled by whoever it is, marketing or legal, et cetera.
And they actually know that they're supposed to do that.
Yeah. So, ensuring that you have control of the situation and demonstrating your control of the situation, because if you do not, if there's a vacuum of leadership, somebody will step in there, whether they should or not.
Yep.
And certainly follow the plan. And if the plan is not working, make notes on it so that you can change the plan next time.
I learned a ton of stuff when I was in Boy Scouts. Shout out to all my fellow Eagles out there. When you are dealing with a emergency, right? And it's as simple as somebody with a broken leg, somebody's down, you're treating for shock. You cannot just expect that someone around you or someone in the group is going to call 911. You would literally have to point at someone and say, you call 911, right? That type of leadership is needed during incident response. Someone has to be at the helm. Ideally, it's someone who has actually trained and was already predetermined to be in that role, who everyone knows is going to be in that role, who's going to be that quarterback. But you need that leader. Otherwise, yes, people will just start stepping in. And it might be because they have the best intentions. But I heard some places paved with, the best intentions. So clearly having somebody in that leadership role. I love that. Rob, I want to ask you, we've got all these great ideas of what we are doing, but what are some failures that you're seeing come out of, training that you've seen that people have then maybe been in an instance, and you're like, ooh, guys, why did you do that?
Right.
Any examples or kind of lessons learned about, while you're in the heat of it, real failures that kind of took it the wrong way?
Yeah, and we get access to, obviously through non-disclosures, to reports, because part of the planning process is we want to understand, where things have gone wrong in the past and what you've done about it to rectify it. And quite often, a year later, we'll be coming back to run another scenario, and some of the issues are still, raising their ugly head. So the process is broken down somewhere in terms of rectifying the issues. What I will say is, during Bang, chaos will ensue. Now, how much chaos you want is entirely up to you. And that depends on how much you practice that chaos, that chaotic moment of coming together and saying, we don't know what's going on right now other than these three things, these two things, or whatever it might be based on your scenario. And so how do we get organized in those first few moments? And it has to be those first few moments, because as we've discussed here, social media is going to be we're going to be blowing up at some point. And hopefully, we've got a tight organization, and that doesn't happen until later on. But typically, something's going to start to evolve as it relates to, the public finding out about this, customers and all the other stakeholders that may be involved. So it's about being organized in those first few moments. And the better organized you are in those first few moments, the better chance you're going to have in hour 1, hour 4, day 4, day 64 in terms of your response. And that only comes, unfortunately, again, from the preparedness piece, which is, you know, on my left side as I'm looking on your right side there. Yeah, that only comes down for practicing the bang, right? So, okay, go activate the team. You've got a process for it. You've got a plan for it. Go do it. So I think the failures there are not being organized enough. You know, and again, it comes down to, you know, poor prep.
Yep. I will add one to the failures, and I want to go into post because we're coming up on a quarter 2. One of the biggest failures I see is people pull out their policy or their plan for the first time when they need it. Don't do that. Again, kind of back to, you should be training and prepping over here, right? The first time you read your policy or plan should not be the day that you actually need it. So, you know, lack of awareness in the policy. I think that's huge, and I'm not going to be able to write very well because I'm trying to talk and write, and somehow those synapses don't fire in my brain correctly. So anyway, good deal. Bad thing happened. Boom. Right? We are now. Oh, Mike, sorry. You want to talk about boom before we go right a boom?
Yeah, one other thing that around failures, and I guess it's just post boom, is that especially in a cyber event, it's imperative to avoid blame. So, you know, we, the organization, have been victimized by something bad happening. Maybe somebody could have prevented it if they had done X, Y, or Z, and maybe they knew they could have done X, Y, or Z, but this is not the time to be throwing people under buses. This is the time to be saying, oh, there's a problem under the bus. Let's get under there and fix it. And post and after action report, we can look at, you know, these are the things that we can do better next time. But
Right.
you can't be blaming and attacking each other when you're trying to save the organization.
When you're
Stephen
in the
had
thick
a
of it,
comment.
that's right. Yeah, hindsight's for the ARR. Stephen, what do you got?
Yeah, and this applies equally no matter the organizational size. Understand that when you're in the midst of response, that anything you say, that anything you text, anything you email, anything you put in a ticket, case management platform, whatever, will likely be, if there's legal action around it, will be discoverable. And so getting back into blame, getting back into snarky comments, which can often happen, people will say silly things. That has to be part of the training, especially amongst the security teams, that snark and, you know, even making analytical leaps before you have all the information is incredibly dangerous, right? So there's the bias that can form, or the opinions, especially when you're sleep deprived and you're angry, and you will have to revisit all those comments. And if you get sued, someone's going to have to go through and read all that stuff. I know, and so you or someone close to you will have to go through and see, and you're going to have a lens. So don't be that person. Don't let it happen. Speak in facts. It's okay to say you don't know early on. So boom happens. You've notified the group. Somebody jumps on and say, "Tell me exactly what's going on, Hoagley." Sir, speak in facts, right?
Right.
Thank you for your concern. We've just activated the plan. As of 17 minutes ago, we were made aware of. At this stage, the scope is X. We're presently, at present, we're working toward understanding full scope, damage,
Yeah.
impact.
Confirmation. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Right now, our mission is to be able to answer those questions, which is why we've brought us all together now at 3 a.m.
Right.
You
Right.
even have to, and I've talked about this before on the show and some of the other things I've done, being self-aware enough to know how you speak. So notice when I was even just sort of playing there, I slowed my speech down and I made it almost monotone. I'm very direct. I'm not getting into superlatives. My sentences are short. Gets into communication, how the brain works and stuff I won't get into here. But that's what you do. And it's important to understand that. Maybe if you don't understand it or enjoy it, have someone who does. Have someone do some coaching on that as well.
No, you very much have to have. If there's anything I think people can take away, that I'll just throw this one out there. There's a clear need for leadership and tone, and just your ability to be a leader throughout incident response. You're dealing with a high stress situation that nobody wants to go through, and now you are thrust into it, usually without any preparation that is going to or is about to happen. And you essentially now have to completely be reactive, and you need cool heads, you need calm, collective direction, you need clear communication. There's a lot of alliteration in there, I'm sorry, but that is needed out of somebody who has leadership capabilities and an incredible presence. I will add to one thing that you said, Stephen, the controlling the messaging piece, but also make sure that as this happens and you start giving those initial, hey, here's what has been done, here's what we know, here's what we're doing, start laying out the cadence for which those people will receive communications over the next time, hour, 2 hours. Hey, this is where we are. The next briefing to you is going to be in 30 minutes. Then after that, we're going to do one in an hour, because that keeps all of them hitting your inbox and blowing up your phone and knocking on your door, standing in your house every 5 minutes going, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? It's like, that is detracting from our ability to actually resolve this issue. I will tell you what we're going to do in about 30 minutes. We'll have another call. So prep that type. If you are in this, folks, prep that time and set those boundaries with the leadership, because everybody who is not you, that is not involved with the hands-on, they want to know what's going on, and that will only detract from your ability to actually execute on that. Stephen, you had something else?
One more quick thing. So this is something that I don't say I invented it, but I implemented it on the fly. I didn't have this job before. That there's one major incident that comes to mind. Every call that was open, every bridge line that was open, that was working toward resolution of this big problem in particular, there was 3 classes of individuals, at least in terms of my control. There were the workers, the people that were actually getting work done, and they were to be on the call but really do not much else. They're working, their heads down working. There was a scribe that wrote down anything that changed, any decision that was made, anything that goes up or down or changes, they're a scribe. The third category of person, there's just one on the call, but one at all times, is a speaker, and they do exactly what you mentioned. So if there's no update, they will repeat back at some pre-identified interval exactly what you said. The next update will be on this call in the next 15 minutes. Right? The call will be silent until then. If there's questions, please ask. Thank you. Right? And they'll repeat that. The next update is if it's hot enough, in 10 minutes. Right? And then to say, hey, and my order to them was repeat this. If nothing has changed, repeat the last damn thing you said. Because there's people lurking on those calls that want updates. Well, I don't think there's anything going on. Well, they're working. But to give that's an opiate that you give.
Yes.
Now it's important to have the roles identified, because now you know it's part of your change log and all. You may not be using your primary systems, all that stuff. But anyway, that's another tip I would say that I would strongly recommend considering those characters for each. If you have a crisis line, an incident line, an outage line, whatever that is, you need those. And then there's the guests that you manage.
Right. Know your roles, people. Know your roles. Well, listen, we've only got about 5 minutes, and I don't want to discard post-breach. All right. So let's kind of move into that. Bad thing. We are now right of boom. Okay. We are so far right of boom that boom is contained. We've quarantined. We've contained. We've hopefully eradicated. Straight out of NIST, folks, right there. We have eradicated the issue. We are now in post-breach, right? We can now start using hindsight and figuring it out. What are we doing? What's each of your top takeaway post-breach ARR time? What are you pulling out? What do you want people to walk away from and say, hey, if you just went through this and now you've got the calm, what are you doing during the calm time? What are you doing now? Rob, what are you thinking as far as AAR?
And again, we only have a few minutes, so I'll keep it short and sharp. And this is not uncommon in exercises. We get to the end and we start to talk about what do you do now? right? And so you need to have put as much time into this part of the process, this part of the bang, if you will, the end of the bang, as you did during the bang. Because if you don't, you won't learn from it. So you got to document, pull those documents in. Who was the scribe? How are we documenting? Where are all those documents? Where are all those decisions made? Where did we have, so we're going to pull that content together and start to put that draft AAR together. And of course, that needs to be shared amongst all the stakeholders. But yeah, really important you spend as much effort and time there in understanding the things you did well, and also obviously the things that you need to learn from. But the things you did well, you may be able to pass on to industry partners or other groups as well within your organization. So if you're impacted locally, you may be able to pass on the good things that happened, within inside the organization. If you've got other areas that that will benefit from that, but document that process and go through it because you need to be able to learn, because you don't want to have it happen again. It's pretty embarrassing if
Right.
a year later you're talking about the same issues.
Mike, what are you thinking about during the post-breach timeframe?
Definitely identifying what the technical issues are that you can do differently, any process updates that need to be made. But also you may have reporting requirements, again, back to regulatory reporting. You may have to be telling outside organizations what happened so that they can capture that information. And if you belong to an information sharing organization, you should be sharing information with your peers out there so that they can not have the same thing happen. Also, you should look for staff areas, people who should be given special acknowledgement for extra effort that they put in, and staff who you may say, well, these people need some extra training. So there's people, process, and technology things in your after action report. And ideally, yeah, you don't want things to happen, the same thing to happen again. You can have a new fun incident next month.
Yeah, exactly. Steve, what are you thinking about during AAR?
I think that entire process of reflection needs to be something that's done depending on the size of your company. But if you have an incident, something that you identify as an incident, the observations, the failures associated with it, there has to be other areas of the business that are waiting on those observations outside of technology. This is a technology focused answer. But the observations, the failures of incidents should drive future change, direction, and investment in the company. It's an ongoing loop. And if you don't, if I go in and airdrop into a company and look at their SOC or look at their analytic capabilities, their response capabilities, that's one of the first questions I ask, because it gets into the influence, the ability. You're going to spend this money on an analytic capability or response capability. It should have the ability to influence the rest of the company, and not just for purposes of general influence, but because they've made decisions and they've made observations and they're wanting to learn and make better. It does a lot of things. It makes your company more resilient. It prevents or helps prevent burnout. I'm not seeing the same goofy incident happening over and over and over again, right?
Right.
And then I would go ask the leader their ability to delineate those observations between proximal and distal. So things that I can fix maybe this week, or things that might take a year and $1 million to fix. To say, how do I have a board of these things that I need that are on my risk register, again, outside of IT? So what based on how I act as an organization, what are my deficits? And then that should be tracked as a risk, right? So this is to give kind of a non-technical answer, but if I don't see that process and that ongoing review from risk, I'm going to be less confident in their ability moving forward.
Yeah. I didn't coin it, but I love the term post breach, right? For lack of a better term, the janitors came in, it's all cleaned up. We're back to, status quo, or at least known good state. We're now in a position where we don't ever want to go through that again. And in fact, post breach is actually the same as being left of boom. It's just those people who are left of boom that have never had a breach have never been post. So anyway, it is a cycle. Take what you're doing, inform your planning, your training, everything else, so that you can be better prepared for the next time. Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for taking the time today. I think on behalf of all the 67 attendees that we have here, thank you so much for being on this. I thought this was a great discussion. I wish we had more time. Audrey says thanks a bunch, or a stack. I don't know if that's a euphemism, but no, thank you, Audrey. Thank you for coming out. just real quick, where can people find you? Rob, we're going to post everything down below and in here, but just real quick, Rob, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, LinkedIn or via preparedx.com. You can get a hold of me. So, but very active socially, talking about all things exercises. So, LinkedIn or preparedx.com. Thanks, Brian.
Excellent. No, thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, LinkedIn is best. Stephen R. Moore. So the name as you see it with the middle initial. Reach out to me. Happy to help.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Mike.
Certainly LinkedIn at mike@sidechannel.com. I'm the only one they've got.
That's right. You are. You are our only Mike, and I love it. Well, again, I'm Brian Hoagley with Side Channel, and on behalf of Gabby and the team at Wiser, we want to thank you for tuning in. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day. It's the top of the hour. I know you have other things to go do, but thank you so much for spending your time with us during this. They will be made available online, this recording, and we will try to transcribe everything that I wrote. Have a great one. Be safe, be good. We'll see you next time for the 5th in our series of 10-ish webinars, and back to basics. Thanks again. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.
I got to figure out how to